guys, so today I want to talk about reading in foreign languages, or languages that you're not as familiar with as your first, or languages that you're not used to reading in, or whatever. So the idea for this video came about because I was reading Crime and Punishment, like I'm about to finish it, whatever, but I was reading Crime and Punishment in English, despite the fact that I'm fluent in Russian. It was my first language. I mean, I learned it in English somewhat simultaneously, but for all intents and purposes, like, I'm fluent in Russian. But I've grown up in North America, and I've lived in North America my whole life, so that means that I'm not as familiar with the language as someone would be who obviously lived in Russia or, spoke it outside of just like family and family friends. And I've read barely anything in Russian in my life. I've read like children's books when I was 8, and then I have this Russian edition of Anna Karenina, which is my favorite book. Not my favorite book, one of my favorite books, which I'm just gonna put here for the duration of this video. I've tried to read it a few times, so I've gotten like 20 pages into it, and then I've ultimately given up because Anna Karenina is insanely long and it's hard. And that's kind of the idea for this video, because for a while I just didn't read Russian classics because I was like, they're too hard for me to read in Russian, and I don't want to cop out and read it in English if I could read it in Russian, so I just didn't read it. And then after a while I was like, screw it. So I got the English edition of Anna Karenina. I'm reading Crime and Punishment in English in translation, and I said screw it, and I said okay, I'm just gonna read it in English, whatever. But then doing that, I still don't feel quite right about it, because if I can read it in the native language in which it was written, then why don't I just? And this isn't even an issue of like translation, because I really like the Richard Pevear and Volkonsky translations, which are really, really good. As I read it, I recognize the syntax is Russian. As a Russian speaker, I can tell that the sentence structure and the integrity of the way in which things would sound in Russian is preserved in that translation. It is a really good readable translation. So I don't even so much feel like I'm missing out on the book, but I'm still kind of like, shouldn't I read in Russian? Shouldn't I at least preserve my understanding of the Russian language? And shouldn't I at least preserve that ability? At this point, I just don't read in Russian. Because I don't read the classics in Russian, I don't read, anything. And that's kind of where I'm at, and I feel kind of silly because it's like I'm a fluent speaker. It's not like I'm learning this language from scratch. I know people that have learned languages and then do read in those languages, and they read literature in those languages, and a lot of people on BookTube as well are native English speakers, but they read literature in English. I haven't done that, and I kind of want to be able to do it, but at the same time, what's stopping me is I'm used to reading quickly. I read quite faster than most people in English, so compared that already elevated reading speed to my incredibly slow speed in Russian, I always kind of feel like I'm wasting time, because I'm thinking, okay, in this time that I've spent 2 minutes on this one page, I could have read 5, 6, whatever in English. And so I always feel like I'm wasting time, but I also don't really know what to read, because okay, if not classics, yes, they're difficult and they're long, and they're maybe not the best place to start for someone who isn't used to reading in this language. But then I don't really want to read modern fiction in translation, because I'm I could just read this in English and it'd be faster and I just get the content. And then I want to read children's literature, because then I get bored, and I kind of feel again I would enjoy this more in English, and I'm kind of wasting my time in Russian. And so I'm just in this hole where I don't read in Russian, so a lot of things are difficult for me to read Russian, and it's very slow, and so I don't read in Russian. And I just kind of want to send this out like a message in a bottle to all the people on BookTube who do read in languages that are foreign to them, and they read actively or at all. And kind of ask what do you read? How does it differ from how you're reading your native language? How do you deal with the fact that your reading speed is slower? How did you get into reading this language? Yeah, that was the point of this video. I guess I just wanted to complain about my inability to read in my own native language, and and just ask for you to help me. Just help me. That's the story of my failure, my personal failure. Yeah. Thanks for watching. And yeah, have a nice day.